Today we have a hot and controversial topic that's shaking Europe and dividing opinions. As you know, here on the channel, we've never hidden our disdain for the BBC, a network that, in our view, is a national disgrace, embroiled in scandal after scandal. But today we're diving into something that goes far beyond the BBC, the migration crisis in Europe. Recently, in Rome, there was a dramatic showdown between two key European leaders, Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy, and Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition in the United Kingdom. Both clashed over the migration crisis, each proposing a different solution for one of the most pressing issues of our time. But the question remains, what is the real solution? Or are we staring at a ticking time bomb that could explode? Let's break it down. In Rome, Giorgia Meloni and Keir Starmer went head-to-head in a meeting to discuss the migration situation. On one side, we have Meloni, who has achieved an impressive 60% reduction in migrant arrivals by sea to Italy. How did she manage that? Through a bold agreement with Albania. Meloni, visibly proud of her achievement, didn't hesitate to boast about it. On the other hand, Keir Starmer was there, observing and analyzing, torn between admiration and doubt. Understandably so, because tensions were high. The two leaders debated fiercely about human rights, with Meloni defending her policies, which have been quite controversial. But here's the real question, beneath the diplomatic smiles and political niceties, is this the future of migration control in Europe, or are we dealing with a ticking time bomb waiting to go off? Now, let's focus on Giorgia Meloni's approach. She's been crystal clear about her stance on migration. As I mentioned earlier, Italy has managed to reduce migrant arrivals by 60% since 2022. This was accomplished through deals with North African countries and, most controversially, with Albania. So, what's the deal with Albania? Meloni has implemented a policy where migrants arriving in Italy are sent to Albania for their asylum applications to be processed. According to Meloni, this relieves the pressure on Italy, allowing the country to better handle the migration crisis. On top of that, she's implemented strict measures against human traffickers, a central issue in the migration crisis. But, as you might expect, Meloni's policies haven't been without criticism. Human rights groups have argued that sending migrants to Albania could violate their fundamental rights. Yet, Meloni seems unfazed by these critiques. In Rome, she defended her policy with an impressive show of strength. In her view, although Albania is geographically separate, it still falls under Italian and European jurisdiction, meaning that migrants would receive the same treatment in Albania as they would in Italy. According to Meloni, Albania is not violating anyone's rights. Migrants are treated the same way they would be in Italy. She even went as far as to dismiss accusations of human rights violations as baseless. It's clear that Meloni is positioning herself as a key player in the European migration crisis, firmly defending her territory in this high-stakes debate. Now, let's turn our attention to Keir Starmer. Unlike Meloni, Starmer was in Rome on a kind of fact-finding mission. It's clear that he was impressed by Italy's progress in reducing the number of migrants arriving by sea. After all, a 60% reduction is a notable achievement. At one point, Starmer even publicly praised Meloni, saying, "They've made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes, treating them as equals to address the causes of migration at their source and tackle human traffickers." But here's where things get tricky. Starmer is the same leader who has criticized the UK's agreement with Rwanda, calling it a political stunt. So, how can he on one hand praise Meloni, whose Albania deal shares some similarities with the Rwanda deal? This is where Starmer's delicate balancing act comes in. He recognized Italy's achievements, but he wasn't ready to fully endorse Meloni's methods, which have been met with criticism from human rights organizations. Starmer seemed to be carefully choosing his words, offering praise in public while perhaps holding reservations behind closed doors. So, this brings us back to the big question, are we looking at a solution to the migration crisis, or is this just a ticking time bomb? Meloni's strategy, while effective in terms of reducing numbers, raises several ethical and moral concerns. Critics argue that outsourcing asylum processing to Albania is a way for Italy to dodge its responsibilities and shift the burden onto other countries. Additionally, while Albania is under European jurisdiction in this context, it's still a country with fewer resources and infrastructure compared to Western European nations. This raises concerns about the quality of asylum processing and the treatment of migrants in Albania. On the flip side, though, we can't deny that Meloni's approach has yielded concrete results, at least in the short term. The number of migrants crossing the Mediterranean has significantly decreased, and her strict measures against human traffickers have had a positive impact. But here's the thing: while Starmer was undoubtedly impressed, he didn't seem fully convinced that adopting such controversial methods was the right path forward. And this leads to the bigger question: is it possible to solve the migration crisis without resorting to extreme measures? What about the rights and well-being of migrants? These are the ethical dilemmas at the heart of this debate. Meloni's policies have stirred up mixed reactions across Europe. On one side, some people see her as a bold leader, making tough but necessary decisions to protect Italy's and Europe's borders. On the other side, many accuse her of being callous and disregarding international refugee and human rights laws. As for Keir Starmer, his approach appears more diplomatic but also more cautious. He doesn't want to ignore Meloni's successes, but he's wary of being seen as a supporter of controversial policies that could cause a backlash in the UK. Now, let's compare Italy's situation to that of the UK. As we've mentioned before, the UK has been heavily criticized for its deal with Rwanda, which aims to send migrants arriving in the UK to Rwanda for asylum processing. This policy has been incredibly controversial, sparking protests both in the UK and abroad. At the same time, Starmer knows that the UK has its own migration challenges that need addressing. And, if Italy has managed to reduce migrant arrivals by 60%, it's only natural for Starmer to look into whether some of Italy's success could be adapted to the UK context, though without fully embracing Meloni's methods. So, what can we take away from all of this? The migration crisis in Europe is an incredibly complex issue, and there's no easy fix. The solutions currently on the table, like Giorgia Meloni's policies, might seem effective in the short term, but they're surrounded by controversy and ethical concerns. Meanwhile, leaders like Keir Starmer are looking for a middle ground, admiring the results but being cautious about the methods. What's clear is that migration will continue to be one of the most divisive issues in European politics. And as Meloni, Starmer, and other European leaders search for solutions, the real question is, can they find a way to handle the crisis effectively while also maintaining a humane approach?